all taxes than they did before. And if we can extend this tax cut, that will continue to be the case. The generational reforms we made in 2017 were designed to strengthen investment, boost economic growth, increase take-home pay, reduce poverty, and make America strong, and it worked. Not only did taxpayers keep more of their hard-earned money, but a growing economy powered median household to an all-income to an all-time high. The labor market improved. Workers saw record wage growth, and the unemployment rate fell dramatically to 3.5%, the lowest in 50 years. And the lowest income workers experienced the largest wage growth. There was capital formation explosion in the United States, and corporate inversions, corporations leaving America, stopped and became a thing of the past as companies came back home to America and became the place to form capital and do business again. All Americans reap the benefits of a booming economy. Extending this current proven tax policy and building on it is the best way to restore economic prosperity and opportunity for working families, many of whom are struggling to recover from the historic inflation of the last 4 years. Tonight, I expect we'll hear once again the politics of fear, as my Democrat colleagues claim all sorts of dire things that will happen, including that we're just going to cut taxes for the wealthy so that we can do our own projects and benefit the wealthy and corporations. This attack has been used for nearly a decade, and it's just as false now as it has been in the past. Americans should not be scared by these falsehoods. What they should be alarmed by is what my colleagues and I are committed to preventing: the largest tax hike in history that will occur if we do not extend the current Trump tax cuts. This chart shows, of all these dollars of tax relief that we are talking about, contrary to the argument that they go to the wealthy, $2.6 trillion of this tax hike goes to people in households making less than $400,000 a year. And the vast majority of that goes to people in the middle, lower, and upper middle income categories. Families of four making $80,000 will see a $1,700 tax hike if we don't extend this tax relief. 20 million small businesses will see their rates go up to 43.4%. The child tax credit will be cut in half. The standard deduction will be cut in half. The lowest income earners in America are the ones who are benefiting the most from this legislation today. Republicans are united in our efforts to make this work. Now, one of the things we're focusing on is making the tax cuts permanent. Not only are we focused on extending these policies, but we're committing to make this growth in our economy permanent so we don't have to face these dire consequences in the future. Permanent tax policies promote stability and lead to more pronounced economic effects than temporary ones. Making these tax cuts permanent will provide businesses with the certainty and the stability they need to make the long-term investments that drive growth, accelerate productivity, and increase prosperity across all segments of our economy. Studies find that a permanent extension of the TCJA would increase long-run GDP by 1.1% and increase after-tax income for all Americans of all income levels. Making the small business deduction alone permanent is estimated to create 1.2 million jobs annually over the first 10 years, increasing to 2.4 million jobs in the long run. The President's Council of Economic Advisors just released an analysis that says that extending the Trump tax cuts combined with other pro-growth economic policies that we are pursuing now would boost the level of short-run GDP growth by 3.3 to 3.8%, and long-run real GDP growth by 2.6 to 3.2%. Now, what does that mean? It means we're going to see that it will raise annual real wages by $2,100 to $3,300 per worker, increase real annual take-home pay for median income households with 2 children by roughly $4,000 to $5,000, save over 4 million full-time equivalent jobs from being destroyed, and facilitate $100 billion of investment in distressed communities. That analysis also projects that extending these tax cuts, together with the full suite of the Trump administration's policies, such as deregulation, which the CEA previously estimated would add 1/10 to 2/10 percentage points to real GDP growth over a decade, is expected to result in a 3% annual real GDP growth rate over the next 10 years. Now, what does that mean? According to CEA, that 3% growth in our GDP will result in $4.1 trillion of additional revenue to the Treasury to help deal with our national debt. $4.1 trillion. To unleash that growth, the best way to make these tax cuts permanent is by using a current policy baseline. This is the scoring method that more accurately reflects reality. The average American easily understands that there is a difference between a tax increase and a spending cut. However, there's an inherent bias in Congress's scoring process where tax policy is treated different than spending policy. If tax rates are scheduled to increase, like they are right now if we don't act, spending just continues and continues and continues unabated, which the budget rules say don't have any cost. That's what we're trying to fix today in this bill. In fact, there is $2.5 trillion in spending that is automatically extended by our budget rules over the next 10 years under a current policy baseline that they currently use. Even the Obama White House has used a current policy baseline for tax policy. They recognize that there's a difference between increasing taxes and cutting spending. In 2013, the Obama White House stated that current policy baseline is the appropriate reference point, since it measures changes relative to the status quo, rather than the mix of expiring provisions and policy changes that would likely never be implemented. Interpreted, what they said was exactly what I've been saying. President Obama and his team said, you can't say that just keeping the tax rates where they are and not raising them is the same as spending more money. We need to level the playing field and sever the connection that creates a tax and spend budgeting process in Congress. And that's another thing we're going to do today. Critics who have been strangely silent over the years as trillions of dollars in spending has been automatically extended under a current policy baseline now take offense to correcting that bias toward forcing federal spending. As applied only to tax policy, those critics assert that we'll be increasing the deficit by using a current policy baseline, or we're using this baseline to hide the cost. Let me be very clear. We're not hiding the score that JCT or CBO would assign to the bill under a current law baseline. In fact, I like to see that score. It shows the amount of the tax increase that my colleagues on the other side are trying to push onto the American people. But let's be fully transparent. Both an estimate based on the current policy and one based on the current law will be released when we consider this bill on the Senate floor. And then Americans can see what kind of savings have been given to them by not raising their taxes. Under our current existing tax regime, the revenue to the GDP ratio this year will be about 17.1%, meaning we will raise taxes for the federal treasury under our current tax policy of about 17.1% of GDP on a current policy baseline. It will also be about the same next year if we don't let the taxes go up, meaning that the revenue will not appreciably change. Yet my colleagues on the other side say it's going to spike a hole in the deficit because, why? Because they won't get their hands on that $4 trillion of new tax revenue out of the American people. This would not increase debt relative to GDP. It would simply prevent a tax increase. And we need to be honest about what those tax increases would and would not do. Those who say we should let taxes go back up say, wow, then we could use it to pay down the national debt some more. Every tax increase that Congress has adopted for as long as I can remember was not used to pay down the national debt. It was used by Congress to spend more money. We've got to take that pressure off of spending as well. Congress does not have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. Senate Republicans are united in our desire to take concrete steps to address our deficit and get our fiscal house in order. Because the bill we're debating today is within the confines of reconciliation, the scores and numbers that we'll be discussing don't reflect that full fiscal picture. In order to have an honest discussion of what needs to be done, there's an acknowledgement that needs to be made that other factors are also at play that can generate economic growth and reductions in spending. What am I talking about? Economic growth. As I indicated in one of the charts that we just had up, the estimates from the CEA are that if we make the tax policy permanent, the confidence that will give our economy and the boost that it will give our economy in proper tax incentive policy will grow the economy by as much as $4 trillion of new revenue to the federal treasury. The president is also directing impacts in the government through his efforts and the Department of Government Efficiency to aggressively cut waste, fraud, and abuse from our government programs. Spending on federal government programs has ballooned in recent years. We have a responsibility to evaluate these spending increases and ensure that these programs work effectively and efficiently for everyone. The president has also undertaken and will likely pursue more deregulation. Deregulation has had as big an impact on revenues and economic growth as tax policy has in the past, and we should recognize that. The bottom line is that in addition to the action that Congress can take, there are activities that the president is currently engaged in that will impact our fiscal policy by either reducing spending or increasing revenue, and we should also take those into consideration. Congress must begin the process of restoring fiscal sanity by achieving deficit reduction and spending reforms as the best way to achieve that goal. In contrast, imposing the largest tax increase in our country's history would be counterproductive by easing the gliding path and making it easier for more spending. We will have a very robust debate in the weeks ahead about the best way to deliver on President Trump's agenda, and I look forward to those discussions. The budget resolution unlocks the process for us to strengthen our national security, secure our borders, permanently extend the Trump tax cuts, and provide additional middle-class tax relief. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from California.
Mr. President, the Trump administration is corrupt. It is easily the single most corrupt and lawless administration in American history. And it would be exceedingly difficult to debate that simple proposition, because notwithstanding all of the whataboutism we occasionally hear, there is really no denying it. The self-dealing by unelected billionaires like Elon Musk, the presidential meme coins, the quid pro quos, the dismissal of corruption cases in exchange for help on the president's policy agenda, the dismissal of national security personnel, not on the basis of national security, but on the word of right-wing cranks, the deportation of someone to a maximum security prison in another country on the basis of a clerical error, the mass illegal firings, the reckless use of commercial apps for classified information, the scorning of court orders, the phony math to hide the deficit exploding impact of tax cuts for billionaires, the attacks on Social Security, calling it a Ponzi scheme when people are making The attacks, those that are making the attacks, are the con men who want to raid the hard-earned retirement funds belonging to our nation's seniors and veterans. The swamp is full, it is overflowing, and Donald Trump is standing right in the middle of it, up to his ears in the filth. And it is plainly obvious to anyone who is watching that the president simply doesn't care about anyone but himself. Not you, not your families, certainly not the American people. He is in it for himself. While your retirement savings are being wiped out, he's playing the back nine at his country club. Oh, caddy, would you hand me a number 6? Now the Trump administration's abundant corruption doesn't happen in a vacuum. His corrupt self-dealing doesn't just boost his own bottom line and that of his wealthy donors. It hurts everyday Americans. It hurts Californians. It hurts all of us. So let me give you some examples. Days before Donald Trump was sworn in, he took one of the most obviously corrupt actions of his political career. And that's saying quite a lot. The president took to Twitter to announce that he was launching his own cryptocurrency, a meme coin. He would maintain a vast ownership of the stock in it, but anyone in the world could buy in, from a Chinese national under indictment in the US to any sultan in the Middle East looking to buy influence, and predictably, the meme coin just skyrocketed. On paper, he appears to have made billions on it. It's possible he made more in one day from this joke cryptocurrency than he had made in his entire life up to that point. You might recall a press conference he had when a reporter asked him at the beginning of his presidency, are you going to continue to traffic in this coin and this currency that's making you a lot of money? And the president's question to him was, well, how much is it making me? And when the reporter said, well, it's making you a lot, the president was delighted. Turned to, presumably off camera, Elon Musk or one of the billionaires and said, well, that may not be much to these guys. And there was great laughter to be had. The corruption is out in the open. And the thing about this new currency is that it's a message to anyone who wants to curry favor with the president. Whether it's foreign governments or oligarchs or wealthy Wall Street billionaires, it gives them a chance to literally buy Donald Trump's favor, directly, corruptly, and unmistakably. Now, who does that ultimately hurt? Short answer is everyone else. So maybe a billionaire is buying a bigger tax break, but that means hardworking Americans are going to have to pay for it. Or maybe it's someone under indictment for fraud who can now get their case dismissed by Donald Trump's DOJ for the right price in meme coin. That hurts every American because it just invites all kinds of further corruption. Now the president's kids are in the crypto business, and there are even more opportunities for graft. In other parts of the world where there are long traditions of such corruption, they would be called princelings. There's a name for them. They're called princelings. Well, congratulations, America. We now have our own princelings, and they are called Eric and Don Jr. Now, as it turns out, it's not just by buying Trump meme coin or the kids' crypto investments that may help get the Justice Department to drop your case or get the Justice Department to go after your enemies. Since Donald Trump's first day in office, he has methodically and meticulously purged the Department of Justice of anyone who is not blindly loyal to him. Not loyal to the rule of law, mind you, not loyal to their oath, but loyal to the person of Donald Trump. That is and will be the only standard in this department. It is not a coincidence that the top 3 lawyers running the Justice Department, including Attorney General Pam Bondi, are all former Trump criminal defense lawyers. Their client was and always will be the multiply indicted and convicted felon who occupies the Oval Office. So how does this hurt everyday Americans? Well, it does so in a few ways. First, it means that the department's resources will be focused on all the wrong things. The DOJ should be focused on keeping Americans safe. It should be focused on cracking down on violent criminals and addressing the fentanyl crisis. It should be hunting down fraudsters who scam Americans. But instead, they're focused on retribution, on going after Trump's enemies, on helping those who were loyal to him, and wasting countless hours and resources in the process. But also, Trump is using the DOJ now to protect his friends and allies. You don't have to look any further than the case in New York. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, indicted on serious corruption charges. A mayor who then, seeing the writing on the wall, pursues a kind of quid pro quo with the president. He goes down to Mar-a-Lago, and the quid pro quo eventually becomes as plain as day. It is out in the open. The president's own border czar does a joint interview sitting next to the mayor on Fox and Friends on their couch to lay out the stark quid pro quo in exquisite detail. All that was left unsaid by Trump's border czar were the words, "or else." The mayor would get his case dismissed, and in exchange, he would pursue the president's policy agenda when it comes to immigration. If the mayor was guilty of serious corruption, of bribery, of providing political favors to foreign nations in exchange for lavish gifts, and even the Trump DOJ doesn't deny the evidence against him, that just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, not if he is a political ally of the president. So who does that hurt? Well, it hurts New Yorkers. It invites more corruption in the city of New York. But this trend, of course, hurts everyone. A big corporation screwing over consumers can seemingly prevent investigation or prosecution now by kissing the ring. Just takes a trip to Mar-a-Lago. A corrupt politician can continue to leverage government resources for their own gain, knowing that they may never be held accountable for their actions. You can even storm this building, and they did. You can storm right into this chamber, and they did. You can trample American democracy. You can beat police officers in the name of this president, and not only will your prosecution be dropped, but you will be pardoned and celebrated. And beyond that, the public servants who prosecuted you will be removed, replaced, or demoted. They will be purged. By using the Justice Department as a shield to protect his friends and a sword to go after his enemies, it is the American people who will lose. Now, just down the street from the DOJ, at the Food and Drug Administration, there is something less talked about, but also quite sinister going on. Elon Musk and his many companies owns one, among his many companies, owns one called Neuralink. Now, this is a company that is aiming essentially to implant computers into people's brains. Now, while I am not personally one to want a Elon-sponsored device shoved into my cerebral cortex, I do believe in responsible innovation, and I even celebrate it. But unfortunately for responsible innovation, within weeks of entering office, Elon and Doge had fired essentially the entire team at the FDA's Office of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices. You guessed it, the office in charge of reviewing his product. Gone. That sent a pretty clear message through the agency: get on board with Elon or you're out. It feels like par for the course for Elon, but it is really unprecedented in this country. Especially damaging is the fact that this also occurs at a time when they are just massively laying off people at the FDA. Huge cuts in the folks that make sure our medicine and food are safe. Not only does that mean life-saving medicine doesn't get reviewed and deployed faster to the American people, it means that dangerous stuff gets into circulation much longer before it can be stopped. Or maybe if it just gets to slip through with a wink and a nod and a big enough contribution to the Trump meme coin. And if you thought Elon stopped at the FDA, well, I have some more news for you. DOJ has pulled the exact same move at other agencies, providing oversight over him or with which he has contracts. The FAA, where Elon Musk has desires for contracts for his Starlink satellite system. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, where Elon's companies face a significant threat of oversight, or at least they did before he made that agency largely go away. Or NASA, where Elon's SpaceX has billions in contracts. The Pentagon, more contracts for Elon. And now FDA. You can't find more corrupt self-dealing than that. Not in our history. You may be able to find it in other countries, but until this administration, you couldn't find it here. Now, in the category of good news, I guess if you're really wealthy, there is some good news for you at the IRS. And that is Donald Trump and his buddy Elon are gutting the IRS, tearing apart the agency that ensures that rich folks pay their fair share in taxes so they can't and don't scam the system. Well, by firing thousands of IRS employees, thousands of tax collections of rich folks will never occur, and billions of dollars that could be used to help our communities will never materialize. They're gutting it so that they can say it doesn't work, and then they can gut it even further, all to reward their billionaire friends. But it's worse than that. Much like the DOJ, it seems clear the Trump team has every intent of weaponizing the IRS to go after their enemies. They can order audits against people who speak out, protect those from audits who toe the line. Those attacks won't be just on big business, but also prominent political enemies. They could come for anyone who dares to speak out. A small business that sells a product they don't like, a nonprofit that supports a cause they don't like, they get an audit. But the president's wealthy buddies, no, they do really well. But this gutting of the IRS, this tax giveaway to people by gutting the IRS, this isn't the biggest con. This isn't the biggest con, not by a long shot. Because the biggest con involves trillions of dollars. And that, of course, is the tax cut. How they pay for it and how they don't. Donald Trump, who solicited untold sums from billionaires in the form of campaign contributions and shady schemes to enrich himself, delivers in a way that those donors could hardly imagine. Massive tax cuts for the wealthiest among us, paid for by cutting Medicaid and other vital services, and by borrowing a ton of money from your kids and grandkids, sinking the nation further into debt. Tax cuts for billionaires and more. Well, if you're one of them, that's great news. That means time to buy another yacht, or maybe another vacation home, more money to invest in the stock market, and they may need to, given what the Trump tariffs are doing in the market right now. But that's what their contributions bought them, a few billion here and a few billion there. And pretty soon we're talking about serious money for these wealthy donors and large corporations. But the thing is, these tax cuts aren't free. Yeah, they're using this phony math they call the current policy baseline. It's a phony math that says if you spent $3,000 on a vacation last year, you can spend another $3,000 this year and it won't cost anything because it's the current baseline in your family. But the reality is these tax cuts aren't free. Somebody's going to pay for them. Well, it won't be the real wealthy that pay for them. Everyone else is going to pay for them. Working Americans are going to see their costs skyrocket. They're going to see their retirement accounts plummet and their Social Security and Medicaid ripped apart to give more money to billionaires. And here's the thing, they don't even pretend anymore. They are happy to admit that their multi-trillion-dollar check that they're about to write to billionaires will be paid for by everyone else. Not just in dollars, but in the programs you rely on, programs you paid into your whole life. Medicaid on the chopping block, Social Security, offices closing, phone lines unanswered. They want it to slowly die on the vine. Food assistance going the way of the dodo bird, and the list goes on and on and on. Life will get harder and harder. That is, of course, unless you're a multi-billionaire who wrote a big check to Donald Trump, which, if he doesn't bring about a global recession, just might turn out to be a pretty damn good investment. During his campaign, Donald Trump promised his wealthy donors that he'd make them even richer by cutting their taxes. He invited many of them to his inauguration. Some even got to stand on the stage with them as he was sworn in. This is who Donald Trump is for. He is for them. He is for the really, really rich. That is whom he represents. We are for you. I yield back.
Madam President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you. Madam President, let me say a few words about where we are as a nation, what this budget resolution does, and why I am strongly opposed to it. Madam President, as you may know, we have more income and wealth inequality in our country today than we have ever had in the history of America. 3 people on top own more wealth than the bottom half of American society. Top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. CEOs now make about 300 times more than their workers. In other words, the very rich becoming much richer, and working families are struggling. So what does this budget resolution do to address this very serious crisis? Does it help working people? Does it help low-income people? No, not really. It actually makes income and wealth inequality much worse by providing massive tax breaks to the billionaires and the richest people in this country, driving up the national debt, and making those on top very, very happy. Madam President, in America today, the richest country in the history of the world, we have 60% of our people living paycheck to paycheck, struggling every week to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to deal with childcare, to take care with health care. Madam President, real wages, real inflation accounted for wages for the average American worker have been stagnant for the last 50 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity. And today, all across this country, you have workers working for 11, 12, 13 bucks an hour, working for starvation wages. Some of them are actually sleeping in their cars. Now, how does this budget resolution address the crises facing working families? Well, at a time when many workers are struggling to find affordable housing, what this budget will do is cut back on housing programs, making it harder for working people to get decent housing. It will cut funding for low-income and affordable housing. So it makes life more difficult for millions of working families. Madam President, at a time when 22% of our seniors are trying to survive on less than $15,000 a year, and that's really quite shocking. It's something we don't talk about, something that we don't deal with here in Congress. Can you imagine a senior citizen trying to survive on $15,000 a year when seniors need additional health care, when seniors need to keep their homes warmer? They have all kinds of issues trying to get by on $15,000 a year. 22% of seniors are in that position. half of seniors are trying to get by on $30,000 a year or less. So how does this legislation, this budget, help seniors? What does it do for seniors? Well, it makes it a bad situation much worse. This legislation, this budget, will make it much harder for seniors to receive the care they desperately need in nursing homes. In Vermont, and I expect in most states in this country, we have a major nursing home crisis. Nursing homes are shutting down. Harder and harder for people to get into nursing homes. Well, when you cut Medicaid by $880 billion, you're going to make it much, much harder for seniors to access nursing homes because 2 out of 3 seniors are dependent upon Medicaid to get into nursing homes. This legislation would also cut back on nutrition programs for seniors at a time when many seniors are having a hard time affording the food that they need. And maybe worst of all, at a moment when Mr. Musk and his billionaire friends are laying off thousands of workers at the Social Security Administration, closing down Social Security offices all over the country, making it harder for people with disabilities and older people to get the benefits that they have paid into for their whole lives. This bill does nothing to address that crisis. Madam President, we right now, embarrassingly, have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. A little bit embarrassing, we're the richest country on the face of the earth. We have more income and wealth inequality than any other country. We're seeing a significant growth in the number of billionaires we have, but in terms of our kids, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major nation. Now, how would this budget impact our children? Well, it would make a bad situation even worse by throwing millions of kids off the health care that they have. That's what happens when you cut Medicaid by hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. This budget would cut nutrition programs that 1 out of every 5 children depend upon. Amazingly, sadly, in America, a lot of kids go to school hungry, and this legislation would cut nutrition programs. Furthermore, for working families, this legislation would do nothing to address the outrageously high cost of childcare in America. And by the way, it would make devastating cuts to education, I think significantly in working class communities. Madam President, it is no secret to anybody that our current healthcare system is far and away the most expensive in the world. We spend about twice as much per capita on healthcare as almost any other nation. Most Americans understand and deal with the reality every day that our healthcare system is dysfunctional. It takes forever to get a deal with the insurance companies and get your claims processed. It is extremely cruel. A significant number of people who are struggling with cancer end up going bankrupt because they cannot afford the outrageous cost of the hospital care that they have received. So what does this budget do to address our broken and dysfunctional healthcare system? Well, hard to believe, but it makes a terrible situation even worse. By cutting Medicaid up to $880 billion, this legislation could force as many as 36 million Americans off the health care that they currently have. Now, right now, we got 85 million Americans who are uninsured or underinsured. That number would soar. So you have low-income working people, don't have a lot of money. What happens when they get sick? We lose 60,000 people a year right now, despite Medicaid, who don't go to a doctor when they should because they can't afford to. This budget would make that situation much, much worse. And at a time when we have a massive crisis in primary healthcare, not enough doctors,